have one yet.
Do that. We've actually done that once, where we moved around a bye week, filled it, and then taken it. We had one schedule where I think we had a bye week the second week.
Yeah.
That's probably as much a negative as a positive. So we filled the game and we moved 5 weeks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dave.
As we move into August, abandoned verdict's going to be coming down. The board of directors vote is the 7th. Is this a month where there could be a lot of change to college sports as we know it, or how are you looking at it from your perspective as an athletic director?
I think the next year in college athletics will be a year of momentous change. With it will come momentous challenge. And we're involved in topics now that have got the highest court systems in the land involved. We've got the judicial system is in high gear. We've got politicians in Washington who decided they want to weigh in because the consequences on some of these things that are rattling around are significant to Title IX, which is federal legislation, but also just the competitiveness politically in terms of where the power rests and how decisions are made. I think it's just going to be a really, really challenging year.
Have you determined a figure at Michigan what a stipend would cost your athletic department, and are you set to pay that if that goes into play in the next few months?
We've run numbers, including what we consider to be the appropriate stipend for miscellaneous expenses. We've looked at numbers as to what it would cost to create a disability and health welfare trust fund. And that's hard to do because we don't know exactly what form that takes. But we've looked at that. We've looked at the cost of education for life. This notion of continuing education for guys that leave early, guys and gals that leave early. That's an easier one for us because we've fundamentally been doing that anyway. But to make it permanent and create a fund, we know what that would take. A lot of those dollars we can project and kind of put them into our forecast for the future. And we at Michigan, we can accommodate it. We can accommodate it and still be self-supporting financially. But it's starting to take that operating surplus that we've had and lower it. It's going to be much skinnier, even at the schools that have the resources to absorb all of that. We'll be running at much thinner margins, and we'll have to be much better at maximizing our revenues and at the same time managing our cost area.
What was that stipend? You said you ran the numbers on it. What did it kind of come out to per athlete?
Well, the way we projecting it is all of these universities have a financial aid office, and they have a website where if a set of parents want to send their kids to that school, you go to the website, and it's basically a way of calculating what it will cost you if you send your kid to the University of Michigan. So that's a published number that has been developed by financial aid office in conjunction with all the other constituents on campus who would be involved in that, in coming up with that number. So at the University of Michigan, for the fall and winter semester, it's like $2,555. And then if you stay as a student in the spring and summer terms, it's about another $500-ish number. So if you look at a student athlete who stays on campus year round, it's about roughly a $3,000 number. That's not a number I came up with or that athletics came up with. It's a number that the financial aid office came up with as what it should cost a parent to provide the resources to a student that's needed to cover their miscellaneous expenses. And that would include travel to and from home. So that's the number we used. Now, the NCAA may come up with caps, we may come up with a completely different formula, but right now that's the best number we have to use. I do believe that they've come up with clarity around the fact that that number is going to be variable when you travel from campus to campus. It's more expensive to live, in Southern California than it is in West Lafayette, Indiana, and at some point in time you're going to have some variability among those stipends, but that's what is yet to be figured out. We're just trying to stay ahead of it for the purpose of our planning and making sure that when it does happen, we've accommodated it, at least in form, in our projections.
Not to
simplify things too much, but when you said you think it'll be a momentous next year for college football, momentous good or momentous bad?
Listen, I'm a big believer that change is good, but I also recognize and respect the fact that change is hard. And I think we're in for a bunch of changes, some of which will be very good, all of which will be really hard. It's going to put pressure on these financial models. It's going to drive significant inputs from a whole bunch of new stakeholders that are going to have opinions on how these programs should be run. Whether it's 6 lawsuits that are out there, some of which class action lawsuits, some of which are more individual, the O'Bannon thing, which is the most recent one, the unionization effort, which is hanging out there, the reforms of the NCAA. I suppose the optimist could look at all of this and say at the end of all this chaos, we're going to have a better format in which to compete, a better, more level playing field in which to carry out our work, and maybe even a clear recognition that there are schools at one level that can be doing things and should be doing things that are appropriate that aren't necessarily affordable for schools at another level. If we can work all through that and get to that end, it will be better, but it will be painful because it's a lot of change.
In the O'Bannon, in the trial, the NCAA put forth the argument that if they have to pay players, it could create a competitive imbalance. Outside the courtroom, the argument is because there's a competitive imbalance, the Big Five should have more autonomy. Which one is it?
Well, the battle that's been waged for the 4.5 years I've been in this job is one over, do we try to maintain this level playing field, this competitiveness model, and you take a program that has an annual operating budget of $10 million and you apply rules that make it absolutely the same for a program like Michigan that has an operating budget of $150 million. And so we're going to treat those two the same. So every time something comes up that costs money or requires an investment, it gets voted down because the schools that can't afford it, whether it's a good idea or not, they can't afford it, they're going to vote against it. So the stipend has been talked about now for years. Nothing happens. The education fund, nothing happens. Disability, nothing happens, because anything that costs money is going to get voted down by the schools that can't afford it, and there's more schools that can't afford it than can afford it. So this whole group of 5, the evolution of this group of 5 is really an attempt for the first time to say, here are 65 schools that have big stadiums, they generate significant amounts of revenue, they have virtually, they don't have a monopoly, but they certainly have the vast majority of the marquee players that have more of a national appeal. We've got to create some rules and some standards and some programs that are specific to that group. Let us do it. And that's the fight that's going on right now within the NCAA. Whereas this group of 5 is saying, we want to do these things, we can afford to do these things, we're compelled to do these things. Show us a way within the NCAA that that's going to be allowed. And that's the legislation that's going to be proposed and voted on by the Board of Directors later this month. And it has to be ultimately ratified by the membership.
What's your expectation of that vote on August 7th by the D1 board?
You know, I get out of the business of forecasting, particularly votes of bodies that I'm not associated with. I'm not a part of that, so I don't know. I can just tell you that we hope upon hope that there is a strong recognition of the fact that there is a Division IV. There is a separate group of schools that have a very different model, that are in a position to do some things that should be done, and that we need to create a mechanism to make that happen. And if that's the outcome of the Board of Directors and the ultimate vote of membership, then I think we will have made some great progress with our own internal issues relative to the NCAA.
One of those changes that has gone through is the unlimited meals and snacks. So USC was going to pay up like $1 million. Has that changed anything in your department?
That's really under review, because that's, you know, to basically deregularize meals is something that we're very happy about. But now that that change has been made, our goal at Michigan is to see how do we execute that and do it in a way that's both fair and positive and workable for our 31 teams and our 931 student athletes. How do we make that happen in a way that's both effective and affordable? And there's plenty of ways to do it. One of our facilities project has us looking at creating a better facility arrangement for food service. Because of deregulation of foods and just because of the way our campus works, we really don't have a dining hall or a suitable space to feed vast numbers of student athletes. That's one of the things that's being accommodated in our facilities plan. So there's a long-term solution that we think we're moving towards that will make a lot of sense. There's a short-term problem in terms of how do we immediately enact a change, and we're working through that.